how a stick moves and how the body moves and the physics involved in that. I'm afraid I'm not going to do math because I can't do math. But what I've discovered is that there are at least two approaches in the SCA, and I'm really only familiar with the West Coast approach. And this applies very well to the West Coast approach. It's a way of explaining how most of the people you'll see on the West Coast move their stick. They may not think of it that way, but this is a way of understanding how they're moving their stick. I've watched YouTube video of some folks outside of the West Coast, and some of them use techniques that don't fit well with this. They use a lighter stick with a heavier hand. It's more of a snapping motion, sort of a crack to whip sort of thing, and that doesn't seem to apply well to what I'll be teaching today. So you may run across that and go, hey, this doesn't fit at all, and you're right. This technique is designed around the idea of using a fairly heavy sword, intending to hit your opponent fairly hard. Typically a sword that is a little more tip heavy than not. The balance point might be about here. So if your balance point is way back here, it's going to feel awkward with this style. Today we're going to just use these planks of wood for swinging things around because I like the balance for teaching how things swing. So anyways, so what is a circle sword style? That's what we're going to be talking about all day here. It's an approach to sword work that interprets all movements of the sword in terms of circles. The reason for that kind of a style is reduction of joint strain by having a clear follow-through for every blow. You never end up twisted up where there's nowhere to go if you don't hit something. Reduction of antagonistic muscle tension resulting in faster blows. Your body knows when it's going to get hurt. And if you've been fighting for a while, eventually you will make a mistake and your body will hurt if you've got a hole in your technique. And once your body has been hurt once, even though you think that you're throwing your blow as fast as you can, your body's going to try to hold back on you and not let you do that thing that hurt it last time. You can think about like if you have a red hot burner on your stove, but you've never seen an electric stove before, and your buddy comes up and says, hey, watch this. Why don't you touch that pretty red thing? Oh, no problem, bang, and you burn your hand really bad. And they said, okay, I'll pay you $100 if you touch it again. Your body's going to fight you, isn't it? Even if you're determined, I'm going to earn that $100, your body's just going to pull back against it. It's the same thing. You hurt your elbow, you hurt your shoulder, your body's going to try to keep you from doing that thing that hurt it again. So the idea of a circular fighting style where you've got follow-throughs for everything is that you're regaining the trust of your body. You're teaching your body that, yeah, I know when I was young and stupid, I threw this shot and it hurt. But now, when I throw this shot, always there's this follow-through for the shot. Always there's the safety. Go ahead, relax, throw it as fast and hard as you can. You're safe. You've got some place for that sword to go if it doesn't work out. And your subconscious, your bones, your muscles will listen to that eventually as you train it in. We're going to work on developing an understanding of how blows travel and generate force that allows many different blows to be understood using the same foundations of movement. So if we interpret all of our blows as a circular sword motion, suddenly it's not this trick shot and that trick shot and variant number 5, and each one is completely separate in your mind. Instead, there are one or two ways of generating force and moving, and that applies to all of your varied blows, no matter how tricky the shot is. That makes it simpler for your conscious mind, and it makes it simpler for your nervous system, which speeds you up, makes you able to respond to other things faster. We're going to work on developing an integrated understanding of blow dynamics, which allows one blow to smoothly transition into another, and for blocks to transition into blows. So by putting everything along a circular pattern, we don't have to think of combinations as discrete items. Every blow has the potential to lead to another blow, and once we get to the more advanced ideas, your blocking positions will also be along those same patterns, and so you can move directly from a block to a blow without resetting or adjusting your stance. One result of this method is that the sword can be used for both offense and defense, rendering the shield a valued luxury. Because the movement of a block is right along the same path as a movement to a blow, it's not block, reset, throw, which means if your opponent keeps attacking, it's block, 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 block until they hit you. You can actually turn that tide and send back a response without having a shield. Shields are great though. They can limit where your opponent has the option to threaten you, and you can block with it independently when you need to. So it's a very sword-centric style that we'll be working on So historically, does this approach fit in with real medieval fighting? The answer is yes and maybe. I've utilized a lot of the 14th century manual, the 133, as a foundation for the essential guards and the simplest blows, and then we kind of extrapolate from that. That manual clearly shows the sword being used for both offense and defense, and for thrusting. People don't believe you can thrust. A later period broadsword manual, I think it was George Silver's Paradox of Defense, speaks repeatedly of compassing blows. And in context, I think he's talking about a circular movement of the sword, spinning it around an axis. It's hard to know for sure, but that seems to be what he's talking about there as well. That aside, I started on the path of working on circular blows when I blew my elbow out, tennis elbow, and I couldn't even hold my sword out like this. I had to lay off for at least a half year or so and then come back slowly. And I determined, I don't care how many people I can kill with this particular shot or whatever, if I don't have a follow through, I'm not going to throw it anymore. I'm just going to take it out of my game. And then since then, I've continued to evolve it and get influenced by some other fighters that have also moved in that circular path. And I was well along that path when I ran into George Silver and the 133 manual and found that they actually merge together pretty well. But I'm certainly not trying to be just historical. I'm interested in how can we hit our opponents in the SCA as much as anything. So I'm going to get into a lot of detail on sword stuff, which leads me to want to say what isn't covered in this class. It's an attempt to teach everything, but there are things that are not covered. A couple of very important things we're not going to talk much about is footwork. And don't get me wrong, footwork is probably one of the most important things that you do in your fight. So don't neglect it. Shield work. Shield work's good. Some people are real sophisticated with shields. I'm pretty simple with shield work, but shield work's a great thing for your fighting. And physical conditioning is another thing that is a really important element of your fighting. So you don't want to get obsessed on sword work. Sword work's really important, but those other three things are very important as well. Not to mention the mental game. So, putting it all in perspective, I like to talk about learning how to fight as an analogy to learning how to read. You start out with ABCs, and you sing the little song and learn the ABCs. Those are the smallest elements of learning how to read. You work your way up to words, phonetics, and then you build a vocabulary of words. You start reading simple books, right? Curious George, whatever. You get into advanced reading and writing. And when you get into advanced reading and writing, you're focused on content, right? So you're reading your chemistry textbook. You're not thinking ABCs, right? You're not thinking phonetics. You're not even thinking about the words. You're trying to understand the concept that this book is trying to teach you. And that's where your fighting goes eventually. Today we're working on ABCs and phonetics. We're really going to be thinking about every little detail of how a sword moves. The mistake is to become, there's two mistakes. One is to think that you don't have to drill it. You do have to drill it. Just like learning ABCs, you have to drill it and drill it and drill it until you don't think about it anymore. It's only when it becomes completely a part of how your body moves and how you think about things that you can stop thinking ABCs and you can actually just do it and think about the content of the fight. When you're facing off with an opponent, it's a relationship, it's a thing that goes on, and it's their intent to hit you and not to get hit, your intent to hit them, and how that plays out. That's the real fight. And if you're busy thinking ABCs, how am I going to throw that blow? What am I going to do over here? It detracts from your involvement in what's really going on. So thinking about how you had to learn how to read and how many years that took, and what it's like when you're a little kid reciting your ABCs versus what it's like when you're reading a book now, gives you an idea of where your fighting has to go. We learn something new, we're back in the ABCs, we train it in, and then we're back to reading the real content of the fight. And then to take that analogy one step farther, we're going to be talking about all these rules, right, about how you move and what you do. Just like writing, there's the chemistry textbook, and then there's poetry. In poetry, you start to break some of the rules. You can't really write poetry if you never really learned how to write in the first place. You've got to know the rules, but you can start playing with the rules a little bit, bending them, stretching them a little, and that's perfectly okay once you're at that point in your understanding of the fight. One last little analogy is that of the toolbox and the craftsman. We're going to be talking about toolbox here.